How we doing? What happened to the sunshine out there? You know, I remember yesterday thanking the Lord for the sunshine and the rain. And he said, you know what? I'll make sure you get it all. And that's how we got what you see out there. But we need that too. My daffodils were out and nice and looking good. So I thought, you know, now they're getting a little drink. It'll be all right. It's my pleasure this morning. I really wasn't supposed to talk about the weather. Is that okay, Nancy? It's my pleasure this morning to introduce our speaker, Dr. Franklin Oikelome. In 2011, Eastern University was pleased to add Dr. Franklin Oikelome to the Campolo College faculty. He is the personification of the quality faculty that we are pleased to count among our colleagues. Any rendition of his rather magnanimous accomplishments would take probably the full hour, but I know you guys don't want to hear about my daffodils anymore, so I'm going to give you a thumbnail sketch of what he's accomplished so that you have a time to hear from him this morning. Here's a little bit of what he's done. As a student, on 3 separate occasions, he was the recipient of the Best Student Scholarship Award at the University of Lagos in Nigeria, his native land. In his academic department, he was awarded the Best Graduating Student Award. After graduation, he fulfilled a 3-month term at the United Nations headquarters in New York in the Department of Human Resources. That work resulted in him being awarded the prestigious Phelan Fellowship, awarded to top scholars interested in the field of human rights. He spent 6 months at the International Institute for Labor Studies with the Decent Work Program, where his work and research focused on the effects of the casualization of labor. His later work focused on poverty reduction strategies and enhancing the institutional capacities of trade unions. Dr. Oikelome holds his Master of Science in Employment Relations and Personnel Management and his PhD in Employment Relations from the London School of Economics. He has held a number of academic positions, including Research Fellow at the University of Hertfordshire, Research Fellow and Assistant Professor at Queen Mary University of London, Assistant Professor at the University of Hull. He has an extensive background in supervising student dissertations. He's distinguished in providing pastoral care to students. He's been celebrated for his collaborative regional community efforts. And among his many publications, in 2011, he published Diversity, Ethnicity, Migration, and Work, which is a book I'm sure he's going to refer to in his talk today. Dr. Oikelome and his wife are the proud parents of 2 children. His wife, Gloria, is in our midst today. Let's welcome Gloria. We're really glad to have you here with us. And without further ado, I'll introduce to some and present to others none other than our very own Dr. Franklin Oikelome.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for such a very kind introduction. I want to thank you all for coming. I'm very, very honored that you could brave that weather out there to listen to me. I'm very, very honored. Thank you very much. And obviously, special thanks to the Provost Office for giving me this opportunity in the first place. I remember it was actually David, the director of the program I'm involved in, the PhD program in organizational leadership. I shouldn't have forgotten that. Anyway, it was his idea that I do this, and I want to say special thanks to him in absentia. He's currently on sabbatical. And obviously, you've already been introduced to my wife, my greatest cheerleader. She's taking time off her very busy schedule. She's the coordinator of institutional research and assessment at Valley Forge Military Academy, just down the road, actually. So thank you very much, sweetheart, for coming to support me. Okay, my presentation this morning explores issues from a book which I co-authored with a colleague at Queen Mary, University of London, as you've already been told. This is the book. It was published in 2011. Now, the book is based on a 2.5-year project which was sponsored by the European Social Fund. And it is about work and workers in the healthcare sectors across 3 continents, and in particular the UK, the USA, and Nigeria. Now, my colleague and I picked Nigeria mainly to represent the source countries experiencing the brain drain of their healthcare professionals. We picked the UK and the USA to represent the host countries where these migrant healthcare professional workers find themselves living in diaspora. Now, let me first give you a brief synopsis of the book. Is it okay if I plug the book a little bit? Well, I have the floor, so I might as well, right? Okay. Now, the book provides a comprehensive picture of diversity, ethnicity, and migration in the healthcare sector, and it analyzes the key themes of career and career structure, social processes, segregation, racism, and sexism at international, national, and local levels. It also offers important insights into inequalities in employment and healthcare by providing a historical and global perspective before engaging deeply with the working experiences of highly skilled international migrants, as well as low-paid migrant and minority workers. I will recommend, obviously, that you get a copy if you're interested in finding out more about the details of the study undergirding the book, such as the participants' demographics, the methodologies, the scope, etc. But suffice to say at this point that we employed both quantitative and qualitative methodologies in our investigation over the 2.5-year period. Just to give you a very brief example of that, in the UK, for example, we used, for the quantitative study, we surveyed about 9,000 doctors across the UK, and we got back 2,596 respondents, which is quite a substantial response rate. For the qualitative study, we interviewed about 100 participants in all, and they included doctors, nurses, administrators, managers. That's on the high-end scale of the participants. On the low-end scale, or should I say the low-pay workers scale of the demographics, we had security people, porters, we had cooks, we had receptionists. I mean, basically people on the lower paying scale of the health sector. We also interviewed policymakers at both institutional, national, regional levels within the UK. So it was quite a very comprehensive research. But more details can be found in the book. And we have copies in the library, by the way, if you are so inclined. Now, the issue of discrimination in the health services is complex. Firstly, because the health services rely on migrant workers to deliver their services, and without them, the health services simply cannot function. And secondly, because workers who qualified outside the UK and the USA may face different conditions. It's obviously not possible for me to cover all the issues in the book in just 1 hour. So What's my goal? My goal this morning is simply to provide you an insight or give you brief talking points from the book about the career and work experiences of ethnic minorities and migrant workers, and hopefully reinforce the need for organizations and society in general to be more proactive in ensuring that these people get a fair shake. Now, the dictionary defines a migrant as someone who moves from one region to another by chance, instinct, or plan, or an itinerant worker who travels from one area to another in search of work. Our study is about people who migrate legally from their home country to another, and nearly in all cases from developing countries of Africa, Asia, South, and Latin America to the developed countries or continent of Europe and the United States and Canada. So it's important for me to make that distinction from the get-go, that our study is exclusively focused on legal migration, migrants who travel legally from one country to another. But our study also focuses on the work and career experiences of ethnic minorities in these developed countries. And in our case, ethnic minorities in the United States would obviously include African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, Asians from the Pacific or India. In the case of the UK, this would include blacks, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, Chinese, and Indians. On a personal note, as you must have gotten an idea, my expertise is in the field of business and management, to be more specific, human resource management, as well as industrial relations or employment relations. My research interest, in a broad sense, lies in the interconnecting fields of inequality and employment. My interest in the area of inequality research actually stems from my overarching passion to see a just and a fairer society where people are judged at work and in their career, not based on how they look or the color of their skin, but on how they perform. Now, let me start with full disclosure. I have dual nationality. I am a Nigerian as well as a British citizen. I was born and raised in Nigeria, and I migrated to the UK in late 1997 to study for a master's degree at the London School of Economics, as you've already heard, where I also did my PhD. Now, after my doctorate program, I worked in the UK, then New York, back to the UK, and then on to Switzerland, and then back to the UK. Now I'm in the US. And I've been since August of 2011. So from a personal standpoint and experience, I can attest to the fact that migrants in general do face a number of challenges. Becoming a British citizen has undoubtedly been helpful to me as a migrant, to the extent that work restrictions have been totally removed, and I do have access to social benefits that non-citizens are usually excluded from by law. However, the fact that my more obvious ethnic minority status or migrant identity seems to sometimes, if not most of the times, overshadow my British citizenship is concerning, to say the least. Let me explain by giving you an example. I remember flying from Switzerland, where I was working at the time with the UN, into the UK to defend my PhD thesis. Here I was in my best suit, walking down a stretch of road on my way to where I was staying the night with a friend. Now, even though it was a predominantly white neighborhood, notorious for racism, nothing actually prepared me for what was just about to happen. This car pulled up by the curb next to me. I looked and I saw a group of young white males in their early 20s, probably late teens. Down came the window, out came a whitish liquid substance, thrown at me. They shouted some racist obscenities and drove off, laughing their heads off. I just stood there all bewildered, obviously shocked, all drenched in this white murky substance, whatever it was. And I was thinking to myself, what just happened here? Now, thankfully, majority of the stories from the participants in our study were not as blatant as the one I've just described. Still, some of the stories weren't any less dramatic, even if most tended to be, subtle or covert in tone and appearance. But before I proceed to the experiences of migrant healthcare workers in the UK and the USA, I think it's necessary to first understand why these migrants leave their home countries in the first place, which was why we included Nigeria in our study. Now, a lot has been written about why healthcare workers migrate. In the case of Nigerian healthcare workers, on the one hand, we have the apparent and well-researched reasons published in the literature, while on the other hand, we have the seemingly overlooked or largely ignored reason which we have argued in our book. According to the literature, reasons for wanting to migrate would include wanting to work in a better management health system, wanting to continue education or training, wanting a more conducive environment, and wanting a more realistic remuneration. And these are well-valid reasons. So in a nutshell, health workers, we understand, migrate in order to further their careers or improve their economic or social situation. However, we were curious. We were curious about the first reason, wanting to relocate to work in a better management, and found it necessary. We found it necessary to explore further what better management in the Nigerian context means. Now, we also thought that if we understood what better management in the Nigerian context means, it could help us to explain part of the reason why Nigerian workers migrate and why overseas-based Nigerian doctors appear unwilling to relocate back to working in Nigeria. And what we discover is that ineffective management of the sector's ethnic diversity plays a part in the process. Now, again, let me explain. Nigeria is Africa's most populous nation and one of the world's most diverse. We are about 160 million with 374 identifiable ethnic groups divided along ethnic, class, and religious lines. Now, because of this, the issue of representation is very central to the challenge of managing diversity in Nigeria. We have three major ethnic groups: the Hausas, the Igbos, and the Yorubas. And we have hundreds of smaller ethnic groups, of which I'm one. My wife is from the major ethnic group, the main ethnic group. But this is the fact of the matter. Non-indigenes of particular states in Nigeria are discriminated against. A Nigerian who cannot prove that he's a Nigerian of somewhere by producing a certificate of indigeneity is discriminated against in every state of the Federation and is barred from many opportunities at the federal state level as well. The discriminatory practices includes denying non-indigenes access to civil service jobs, lower tuition fees at universities, or academic scholarships. And in some cases, non-indigenes, non-indigene civil servants have been purged en masse from their civil service posts in order to create more jobs for indigenes. Now, by the way, these are facts which have been corroborated by Amnesty International and well documented. In fact, I have a friend who is currently well settled in the UK. He was a childhood friend. We grew up together in the same neighborhood in Nigeria. He's in the medical profession. And when I asked him what's the motivation for his relocation to the UK, he told me specifically that it was because of this particular issue of discrimination that he encountered in his job. So I guess it's interesting that even though there's a lot of focus on the pull factors in the literature, the pull factors obviously referring to the good working conditions, the better healthcare systems, and all that, the push sorry, the push factors, such as I've just described, seems to be largely ignored. The push factors we have in the literature all seems to coalesce around wars, famines, and so on, whilst those factors are obviously also valid reasons why healthcare workers migrate. I think the undercurrent push factor of ineffective management, diversity management, is also a valid reason. So, after deciding to migrate, the question is this: do healthcare migrants finally discover utopia in diaspora? Are they now finally getting a fair shake in their adopted countries at work and in their career? Well, we found similar patterns of gendered and racial segregation and inequalities, and the evidence suggests that there are similarities in the experiences of these healthcare migrant workers, regardless of whether they settle in the UK or the United States. Apparently, their undoubtedly high human capital cannot protect migrant healthcare professionals from cultural practices and social networks that are reproduced by the elites in these countries. In both countries, these workers work at the lower levels of the hierarchies, and where they are highly skilled professional workers, they are more likely to work in unpopular specialties and in unattractive locations. It is instructive that American policies have welcomed overseas doctors because the latter fill positions in specialties and locations that are less attractive to their American counterparts. And this may help to correct physician imbalances in some rural or undeserved locations in the USA. So it is not surprising, therefore, that there are incentives such as waiving the exchange visa requirement that would otherwise have returned overseas qualified doctors to their home countries after residency training, in exchange, obviously, for agreements to practice in undeserved US settings, as well as granting them permanent residency status under a variety of conditions. This is actually very similar to the British context, in which migrant physicians will fill posts that are unattractive, less lucrative, and certainly unfashionable, and in locations that are less attractive to their British counterparts. Now, before I go on to specifics on each country, some statistics will be very useful to put things in perspective. Now, according to the US Census Bureau, around 1/4 of the US is currently made up of minorities. In the UK, this figure is about 10%. By 2050, it is likely that more than 1/3 of US residents will identify themselves as minority. In the UK, this figure is projected to be about 20%. Now, this has prompted the argument that a similar rise in the healthcare workforce across both countries, in line with these projections, has become imperative. However, current statistics show that racial and ethnic minority groups as a whole are substantially underrepresented in the national physician workforce in both countries. In the case of migrant doctors, or what we normally refer to as international medical graduates, IMGs, they make up a little over 25% of the total US physicians and 31% of the total UK physicians. In fact, in the year 2000 to 2007, the contribution of IMGs to the net increase of practicing physicians in the US alone accounts for almost 55%. So, what does this all mean? The fact of the matter is, immigrant healthcare professionals are of major importance to the healthcare labor supply in both countries. And the demand for medical personnel, physicians, and nurses in both countries is similarly insatiable, which is why I believe a focus on their experiences is not only important, but is truly and well justified. Now, in examining the evidence specific to each country, let me begin with the UK. According to the British Medical Association, which is the premier organization representing all medical doctors in the country, racism within the National Health Service is affecting the careers of some physicians and is even considered acceptable behavior in some quarters. For instance, before 2008, the medical profession has a binary structure such that one has training and career progression leading all the way to becoming a consultant, which is the highest pinnacle of that profession in the UK. And then we have the other one, which is a non-training grade, apparently created by the authorities to mainly accommodate doctors with overseas qualifications. But here's the problem. The latter end is a dead-end grade with no upward mobility, career path, or training opportunities. Hence, the doctors lack professional development, educational opportunities, and certainty of career progression. Unsurprisingly, the doctors in this grade are mainly ethnic minorities and IMGs. Furthermore, many of these doctors do clinical work comparable to that of consultants, and they have operational responsibility for their work, but the majority of them feel frustrated about their lack of career progression, and they feel that their contribution to the NHS is not recognized. Now, we also found that IMGs, or doctors with overseas qualifications, are more likely to work twice as hard as their counterparts with UK qualifications, but are less likely to succeed. And we found unfair discriminatory practices in social processes to be one possible factor in explaining this particular result. Our study also indicates that IMGs work significantly longer hours, often exceeding the European Working Time Directive, EWTD. Now, for those of you that may not know, the EWTD is an initiative designed to prevent employers requiring their workforce to work excessively long hours with implications for their health and safety. This is a maximum 48-hour week averaged over a 6-month period. However, for the IMGs in our study, exceeding the EWTD is not always voluntary, since most of them are not entitled to overtime. Now, we also found that IMGs, or migrant doctors, have less access to the largely informal support networks that are currently the main sources of career advice and guidance in their establishments. And one reason for this is that patronage plays a part. In fact, a policy paper by the BMA states that the consultant appointment process is effectively governed by a patronage system, as opposed to one which is based on competency and thereby works to the disadvantage of ethnic minority doctors and those who qualified outside the UK. In a particular case, 50% of IMGs in training, as opposed to 26% of UK qualified doctors in training, agreed that there is too much patronage in the way people are selected for posts at the senior house officer level. What does this mean? This suggests that while IMGs may have human capital, they may lack the social capital necessary to progress in the medical hierarchies. Thus, we are reminded that patronage is not just the prerogative of developing countries. While its form may be different and its degree less, it is still a resource being drawn on in the developed countries. Also related to this observation is the observation by the BMA that the medical profession in the NHS runs a white man's register with jobs for the boys, with enormous power being concentrated in the hands of consultants from upper middle class families who have authority to decide who is shortlisted for jobs, the makeup of interview panels, the evaluation of the performances of junior doctors, and the provision of both formal and informal guidance on career progression. How about incidences of prejudice and racial discrimination in selection procedures? Well, one male British physician of Indian origin said he had been told openly by consultants that there is prejudice. A white respondent who had helped sort applications for training reported that one consultant threw away all those from foreign-born doctors. Another white doctor said that he had been informed by his predecessor that, and I quote, "Really all I had to do was to walk into the interview room and walk out because I'd already got my name on that job," end of quote. Respondents also cited a closed selection process that seemed to rely on not what you know, but who you know. So, it's not surprising, therefore, that we also found that IMGs are significantly more likely to express very low morale compared to UK medical graduates, especially since they are also significantly more likely to say that, to report perceptions of inequality, favoritism, and obstacles to their career aspirations. Now, these are the findings in a very summative form from the UK context. How about the US context? In the case of the US, statistics on the healthcare workforce similarly indicate a clear racial and ethnic demarcation in career accomplishment and experiences. We observe that, in a disproportionate sense, ethnic minorities are highly represented in low-paid work, underrepresented in health services management, and persistent gaps exist in both compensation and satisfaction between managers of ethnic minority background and white managers. Our investigation also reveals that healthcare workers from minority groups are deemed to be worth less than their white colleagues. Let me give you an example of this. This has to do with the Woodbine Healthcare Center in Gladstone, Missouri, and its treatment of Filipina registered nurses. Now, Woodbine Healthcare Center had petitioned the Immigration and Naturalization Service to be allowed to employ foreign registered nurses because of a shortage in the local area. Now, Woodbine gave the INS assurances that the Filipinas would be paid the same wages as US registered nurses in the local area. However, they were paid $6 less than the US nurses. 2 Filipino nurses filed discrimination lawsuits alleging that Woodbine had discriminated against them and their 63 Filipino colleagues in wages, assignments, and other terms and conditions of employment due to their national origin. Now, the EEOC found their claims to be general public importance and announced a $2.1 million settlement. Now, it is cases like this, which illustrate, I guess, why the attitudes and the career experiences of workers in the healthcare sector may differ significantly according to race and ethnicity. In fact, we found in our investigation that in comparison with white healthcare managers, black healthcare managers are significantly less satisfied with the quality of workplace relationships and career opportunities. They perceive that they are less accepted by their organizations. They have less job discretion. They have less access to mentors. They are less satisfied with their careers. They are more likely to agree that attitudinal and cultural barriers in the organization limit their career accomplishment. And they are more likely to attribute the lack of attention to diversity in the organizations to white lack of interest and entitlement. Now, all that being said, we also found that various initiatives and efforts are being made at institutional, local, regional, and national levels in both countries to address these issues of inequality that I've just described, albeit with mixed results. Now, in terms of the details of the strategies that have been employed in both countries and their effectiveness in addressing these inequalities and ensuring that there is a level playing field in both countries, obviously it's outside the parameter of this presentation, but they have been extensively discussed and analyzed in the book. But let me just say this, suffice to say this. Our analysis of good practice initiatives reveal that the majority of the initiatives is seemingly focused on changing the individual. So, for example, you have a lot of initiatives focusing on mentoring, personal development training, etc., And don't get me wrong, these are very, very good initiatives. And they are useful initiatives. In fact, initiatives that focus on the individual may improve individual careers and contribute to a more representative workforce, as well as increase the number of role models. And obviously, all this will go a long way to challenging the culture, as there is clearly an interrelationship between the individual and the culture within a given organization or institution. However, this is our belief. We believe that the investment of resources into tackling the culture may be more sustainable in the long run. But like I said, the evaluations of the effectiveness of these strategies is without the scope of this presentation. Now, at the beginning, I pointed out that our investigation only focuses on legal migration. Legal migration, not illegal or undocumented workers. However, isn't it interesting how much of the discussion about the role the recession has played on immigrants is centered on illegal immigrants and what roles they play on the job market? And hey, I have no qualms with that. I totally agree that there's a legitimate debate, at least a conversation to be had about the impact of illegal migrants and illegal immigration on the job market, especially in a time of recession. And there are points to be scored on both sides of the political divide. No problem about that. However, for those immigrants who are documented workers, legal workers, for those immigrants who are documented and legal workers, I don't believe enough has been said about how they are coping with job losses and how the laws of the land only worsen their plight. Not many people are aware of how certain government regulations are harsher on some than others. Now, listen to the story of one elderly worker who writes from the perspective of a faction of the population which seems to have been largely ignored. He says, he wrote this letter actually to a national newspaper. Consider the situation I presently find myself as a result of the recession and some aspects of the immigration laws that preclude those with immigrant visas from filing for unemployment benefits. Though the law empowers immigrants to work and encounter all of the mandatory deductions, such as federal tax withholdings, Social Security, and Medicare to be taken out of their pay packets, if, God forbid, they find themselves out of work for no fault of their own, they cannot file for unemployment benefits. I wish the authorities who administer these laws can take a second look at these policies, particularly in times of recession, and give it a human face. Can anyone appreciate the hardship I am going through as a result of this recession? Ordinarily, I do not complain about the hardship that recession brings to the entire populace, but its effect on those of us on immigrant visas from filing for unemployment benefits is very unfair. I am 67 years old, the father of 6 kids, many of them in my home country. I came here in January 2008. And after serious efforts, I was able to secure a job as a crew in one of McDonald's franchise in Abilene. I worked happily in this establishment for about 5.5 months. Because my son, who brought me to America, secured a job in Dallas, the family had to relocate to Arlington in September of 2008. Since October 2008, I had been making serious efforts to secure any type of job in Arlington, all to no avail because of the recession. Had the immigration guidelines not prevented me from filing for unemployment benefits, I would not have been worse off. I understand that until I qualify to become American citizen, it is only then I can legitimately file for unemployment benefits, if and when I'm out of work through no fault of my own. Again, to qualify for social benefits, I have to have 40 credits. So far, I have only accumulated just 18 credits. Mind you, one cannot qualify for the maximum 4 credits a year unless one has worked and paid Social Security taxes on a gross income of at least $4,250 per annum. As a result of not wanting to be idle, I enrolled at one of the prestigious medical centers in Arlington as a senior volunteer. I hate being idle. I am ready to take any job, even when the pay is below the minimum pay. Now, ours is a Christian institution, isn't it? And we pride ourselves on the ethos of faith, reason, and justice. Justice is synonymous with fairness. I think it's pertinent to close this presentation by looking at a biblical perspective on some of these issues. It is pertinent that the Bible is the ultimate immigration handbook, written by, for, and about migrants, immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. It begins with the migration of God's Spirit and ends with John in exile on the Isle of Patmos. And between these two events, the uprooted people of God seek safety, sanctuary, and refuge. We have the account of the migration of Noah and his sons, and migration is also exemplified in the story of Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Jacob, either migrating or becoming migrants at various points and at different stages in their lives. Even the New Testament begins with a migration story, with God moving from heaven to the earth to be incarnated in a virgin's womb, and later to become an asylum seeker with Mary, his mother, and Joseph, his father, adopted father, in Egypt. Our Lord Jesus also knows what it means to be a victim of both religious and racial discrimination. He challenged the prejudices of his day, which was characterized by Gentiles hating Jews and Jews hating other races. And even though there was hatred between the Jews and their neighbors of mixed race, the Samaritans, Jesus made a Samaritan the hero who stopped to help an injured Jew in his story. He also made a point of stopping at a Samaritan village and talking with a Samaritan woman by the well. And he went on to admonish us not just to tolerate people of all races, but that we should actively show love to all, even our enemies. So as I close, I want you to take a moment and consider your own personal story of migration. Are you where you were born? Have you moved? And if so, for what reason? How many times have you moved? Many of us move by choice, others by necessity, and others by force. But the bottom line is this. Humankind's story is a migration story. We all are or have been migrants, immigrants, refugees, or asylum seekers. Even if you feel exempted from that list today, what makes you think you can't and you won't be on one tomorrow? You can't guarantee that. So, let's adopt the golden rule, or what I always like to call the godly principle. Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. I see before me, seated here, potential leaders of tomorrow, people that will be policy makers someday. And we also already have, policy makers in some form or shape. So let's adopt the golden rule. Let's work together in ensuring that everybody gets a fair shake, regardless of who they are, where they are from, or how they got here. And with that, I say thank you and God bless you. Do we have any question? Yes.
Franklin, thank you for this presentation. As I was driving here, I was listening to a BBC report about Nigeria. There's a section in Nigeria where several thousand children are being lead poisoned, and a group called Doctors Without Borders is trying to address that. And I found it ironic that I come and hear you talk about healthcare workers leaving Nigeria. And it makes me think, in the immigration debate, at least here in the United States, it's often said, while we have controversies around undocumented, low-wage workers, we want people with specialties to come. So there definitely is a very public policy of pulling from places like Nigeria. And as you said, there's also a push from places like Nigeria that cause people to leave. So I guess I'm wondering, from where we sit, I hear your main point being when people come here, we need to treat them equitably and fairly as we would anybody else. But it seems there's a larger justice issue that developed countries like the United States are really taking advantage of this situation in places like Nigeria. And so that Nigeria has this huge health crisis in which they have to depend on outside doctors coming in to solve a problem that if there were enough qualified doctors in Nigeria, they could probably handle it themselves. I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, that's a very good observation that you've made. And I think it's also something that is being, it's a problem, I think, that is being grappled with at the very highest level. I know for sure that at the World Health Organization, it's one of the issues. It's almost like a paradox of some sort, where you have workers, there's an exodus, or like I said, a brain drain of these healthcare workers living for all sorts of reasons, pull factors. There's also on the other hand, there's this active, aggressive policies. Well, maybe not aggressive, but at least there is a policy of wanting to encourage this migration by developed countries because of the apparent need in their own health sector. But then you have the problem of the inadequate manpower of healthcare workers in these developed countries. So at the highest level, they are trying to see how they can, correct this imbalance, because, and this is the way I see it. There is no easy fix. There is no obvious, in terms of addressing the exodus, that you've got to address the issues from both ends. There's got to be a concerted effort at examining why these doctors are leaving in the first place and try to fix that problem, but it's not readily, easily fixed. That's the problem. Because some of the factors are so complicated and intertwined. In the case of Nigeria, for example, there is also the problem, okay, I mentioned to you the vast ethnic diversity of the country, but there's also the institutional setup in the country that actually also encourages exodus of these healthcare professionals. I mean, it's not unusual for professors in the medical profession to actually encourage their students to leave. That, listen, there's no hope here. I've had that said several times, that, listen, it's a shame, but that's just the reality. Corruption is so endemic. There's not enough, investment and so on and so forth. So there's that problem. And then, of course, there's the other problem I mentioned, ineffective diversity management, whereby you have the fact that some people are actually controlling the resources allocation, the political, oligarchies, tilted towards a particular or a few tribes that are dominant. And because of that, they sort of determine who makes progress, career-wise, and therefore you have an exodus as well. So it's so complicated in the case of Nigeria. So if you want to attack the problem at the very highest level, it's almost like you have to unpack the issues one by one, and then when they come here, like I said, it's a different story again, because there's no utopia in diaspora, like I said. It's almost like another problem. Yes, he won.
Among your participants, did you hear anything about their also returning to their home countries, returning in a way, not necessarily physically returning, but returning some other ways to help benefit the home country? So whether I understand is that if the migration is that it's a one-way street, there really isn't only that exodus is a one-way story. Is there anything else that is somehow invisible, return invisible?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said, there was no way for me to go into all the details of the issues. There are very, very visible, if you like, benefits of being here for the migrants, in the sense that there is opportunity to do remittances, to send money back, to help say, family members, or to engage in maybe development initiatives within their communities. I mean, they are trying to give back. In fact, many of them form associations. We interviewed a lot of doctors' associations, nurses' associations that are trying to sort of create a home away from home for the migrants, so that they still have a connection even though they are away from their home. So through those associations, there is that active participation in their home country, even though they are physically away from their home countries. But the major way they are doing that is through remittances. Okay, thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.